Hi, this is Robert Shear with another edition of Sheer Intelligence, which is a presumptive title given to me by my old NPR station, but it's there. And I hasten to add, the intelligence comes from my guests. In this case, it's Thomas Bass, and he has written endless books. He's really one of the more important writers we have in this country, and the range of subjects. And I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can look him up, check out your local bookstore, or check out Amazon. But the book we're here, and there's plenty, and plenty to talk about. But the one we're here to talk about is Return to Fukushima. It's OR Books, and it you know we're in the context of nuclear war right now and its possibility, and whether Iran could have a weapon. And I just want to make one note: I'm not normally a big fan of our president. But today, when we're recording this, he made the statement about both the leaders of Iran and Israel. And hey, I finally have the liberty, even for radio now, to use the word. He said, what did he say exactly? That they're both fucking it up. And I thought, well, that is really an honest statement. But I would say, in a more polite way to put it, we've never had adults watching the store on the nukes, whether they're peaceful use of nukes or, obviously the original design for military use. It's always been, I think, an infantile discussion. But I want to make a point about that because, and for the people who watched the Oppenheimer movie, which once again brought the making of the bomb to the fore, there was no question that the people who built the weapon, and the excuse was that somehow this would, if the Germans had it, but the Germans, of course, were already defeated when it was used, and it was used, I guess, if you believe what was said, over their most of their objections. I guess there were a few, Teller one being one that wanted even bigger ones right away, but the good thing about it, they said, is we've unleashed a technology which can have a profound peaceful purpose and be a source of the energy of the sun without having to pay all of the money for petroleum and everything else. And even then, they knew about pollution, a safe, clean source of peaceful energy. And that became the moral defense, actually, of their scientific breakthrough, which they all feared would bring us to the current moment we're at, where we have to think about the destruction of the planet. The importance of this book, Return to Fukushima, is that peaceful use, in the eyes of Thomas Bass, is not the uh, virtual stepchild of the bomb. It's the wicked, or a wicked stepchild. The bomb is wicked enough, and that it threatens us in so many ways. I'm going to let him describe it. And it's important to talk about it now because we're at a moment where people are turning to the possibility of peaceful nuclear energy, and as a way of avoiding obviously the climate crisis. I want to begin then by using the example of China. And in your Fukushima is a case where China banned seafood from Japan, where they were very strong attacking the Japanese for the leak into the ocean, the pollution, and so forth. So they showed they were not at all naive about the danger. On the other hand, China is a leader in developing nuclear power plants to because they don't have oil, they have a lot of coal, but that pollutes like crazy. So I want to begin with that example, and it's kind of typical of a certain hypocrisy on this issue, and maybe you can offer that or some understanding.
Glad to, Robert. First of all, let me say it's an honor to be talking to you. You've been you've been in this journalism business far longer than I have, and published more books than I have. So even in your introductory remarks, you raised a good half dozen subjects that we could be pursuing for much longer than we're going to be talking. So what to say about China? Yes, China is big in developing nuclear technology. They're building lots of reactors at the moment. And yes, they have banned the import of seafood from Japan. But you have to remember we have an ongoing nuclear disaster at Fukushima. I mean, three nuclear reactors are in the process of melting down as we speak, and they're having tons of millions of gallons, billions of liters of cooling water dumped on them, which then becomes radioactive and is now being flushed into the ocean. Now, this is not standard operating procedure for nuclear reactors. We have an ongoing crisis. We have a disaster at the moment. I mean, for all the talk of nuclear war, actually, the world's largest nuclear disaster at the moment is in Fukushima. So, this is not, every reactor in the world dumps tritium into the water that cools it. And you would not have any nuclear technology if you were not dumping tritium into cooling water. And that's considered standard operating procedure, and no one wants to look at the scientific effect of that. But in the case of Fukushima, it's not just tritium that's in the radioactive water. There are 62 radionuclides in that water. We're talking about strontium. We're talking about plutonium. We're talking about cesium. These are not things that you actually want to have in your fish or in the seafood that you are eating and importing from Japan. So that's why the Chinese have taken that step.
But why aren't the Chinese alarmed at the very use of this technology? I mean, one of the things you argue in your book, I think very persuasively, is that we have alternatives. Maybe not for consuming to crazy lengths, and but that would pollute the world or destroy the world in all sorts of other ways, garbage alone. But I mean, you make the point that with solar, which the Chinese are very good at, and I think they make about 80% of the solar panels. They're very good at using electric cars rather than petroleum cars that they bring to the world now in massive numbers, and yet they're a major, and they're exporting these nuclear power plants. They're helping other countries get them. So why don't they connect the dots in the way that you do? It kind of goes back to the whole basic issue of trying to find virtue in the devil of nuclear explosion and the science and the Hans Bethe point I was making. You have this incredible scientific breakthrough that instantly, as a bomb, kills hundreds of thousands of people. And then there's the search for, well, how can we make this somehow virtuous? Aren't we playing out the same drama?
Yeah, I believe we are playing out the same drama, and the way that I express it is that atoms for war never succeeded in becoming atoms for peace. There was the pretense that the peaceful atom was going to replace the military atom, and it never did. Every nuclear reactor in the world is capable of producing, actually does produce plutonium, and they are capable of producing tritium. They are capable of producing bombs. And in fact, it's from the civilian nuclear power plants that India got its bomb, and from the civilian nuclear power plants that Pakistan got the bomb. So they're really this distinction, that's this supposed distinction that's made between military use and civilian use of atom splitting simply does not pertain. I mean, it's just not credible on the face when you look at it.
Well, that frankly is worth this discussion just alone, that observation. No, really, because after all, what is the argument with Iran? Iran claims they're not building a bomb. I think there's a lot of evidence that they're not building a bomb at this time. Their claim, which is not, it's kind of weird since they're major source of petroleum, but they and also Saudi Arabia, obviously the major source, uh, feel they have to go to this sort of the peaceful use of nuclear power because it's non-polluting, it's virtuous, it's right. Even the big oil producing countries, right, are doing this. And Iran, if they're not building a bomb, and I think the evidence is pretty clear that that hasn't happened, but as you point out, that's a switch that can be pulled. The Muslim bomb in Pakistan, as it came to be known, the Indian bomb, Israel's what are they, 90 bombs that they admit to, until the president called out Israel today I think most people thought that the Israeli bomb was not a threat. After all, they're totally enlightened, reasonable people. They would never use it. And now, the president's saying, "Are you kidding? They're like all the others." I mean, I was so amazed by that statement. But I want to address that question, the crossover, because I think that's critical here. Well, why don't you take it there? I mean,
Yeah, well, Robert, I think you put your finger on it. You have Saudi Arabia and you have Iran, huge producers of oil, uh, pushing headlong into developing so-called civilian nuclear power. And this is just a pretense. It's a cover-up. It's a story. It's a charade or a charade, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Saudi Arabia wants civilian nuclear power in order to build the bomb, and that's where they're headed. And it's because there absolutely is no distinction between the nuclear power plant that produces power and the potential to be making to get the plutonium for making bombs. And this all goes back to why do you want a bomb? Well, you want a bomb. Ukraine gave up their bombs. You remember that. Ukraine is now the poster child for what happens to you when you don't have nuclear weapons. You get invaded by somebody, or you get overtaken, or you get attacked. So, in this world of our, in this precarious world of ours, I guess what we want to walk around with a bomb in our pocket.
Well, let's go a little further with that because this is not something brought up very often, if at all. That it is a fiction. That well, we only want to stop them because they're making the bomb, and yet we're killing the scientists who can go either way. We're saying, well, they're a particularly evil country and their religion is particularly evil, whereas Israel's religion is by definition virtuous, even though there are rather mean Hebraic roots, how you treat your enemy and so forth. But it's really this. In fact, the Pakistan bomb and the Indian bomb were developed on the basis of protecting our culture, our virtuous culture, and we have these evil enemies and they're going to get it. Well, of course, the logic of that is your enemies are going to get it one way or another, and that's of course what Pakistan did. So I want to. How do people answer that? Because they insist there's a big line between peaceful and weaponry, right? I mean,
Yes, and as I maintain, that's surely simply a pretense. It's a make believe, and once you've transferred the technology of enrichment, it's a very simple process, as Iran has demonstrated. They I believe they have enriched uranium to 60%. Well, that's much higher than one needs to run civilian power plants. You run civilian power plants at 5, 10, 20%. 60% is headed on the way to making a bomb. And, even Japan has an enormous stockpile of plutonium. Japan is at the ready to be developing their own bomb. So it's all a question of enrichment. It's all a question of having the technology to leap from civilian power plants to building bombs, as happened, as I said, in India and happened in Pakistan. And it happened in Israel, I might add. I mean, the stories that we've been reading about how Israel got the bomb, they are they're right out of a spy drama. They're right out of thrillers. What the New York Times reported, or I believe it was reported recently, that Israel actually stole uranium, enriched uranium, from the United States. It actually it actually had sympathizers in the United States who managed to ship enriched uranium to Israel for the development of the bomb. And Israel pretends that it does not have nuclear weapons when in fact it absolutely does, and stands at the ready to use them. But these are world questions of world affairs. You should probably be talking to someone who publishes in Foreign Affairs magazine, or somewhere other than a guy who's written a book about Fukushima. Uh,
well, let me defend doing this because unfortunately, my experience, and I actually wrote a book myself about the nuclear weapons on arms race and so forth. But they are in the business of lying about it and
Right.
justifying it, and so you really don't get any clarity. And you're not. You're I say you've written a series of books. I haven't named them or anything, but people can look it up. But you're an insightful critic on a range of subjects, and I'm okay. I'm not going to dwell on the weaponry of it, but again, let me bring it back to China. Why aren't they worried about getting their own Fukushima? What is it there about they now are advertising these sort of smaller, safer nuclear power plants? That's what's going on now. And in fact, in the US, there's a push to do this now, right? I mean, nuclear, peaceful nuclear power is now in, right?
Yes, we are witness. Well, Robert, you're old enough. You're certainly old enough to have witnessed how many nuclear renaissances in your life now. How many times has it been promised that we will have a nuclear renaissance? That safe, fail-safe reactors, small modular reactors, really smart next gen reactors are just going to save us. They're just going to fly down from the heavens and be built up from scratch and provide the technology that's going to save us from global warming. But uh, it hasn't happened. This renaissance has not happened. In fact, there have only been in the past 30 years, we've only built two nuclear reactors in the United States, and they're an utter disaster. I'm referring to the Vodal reactors in Georgia. They've raised the average utility bill in the state of Georgia by thousands of dollars. These reactors that just came online cost over $30 billion. They were 7 years late. This is really a Neanderthal of technology. This is the worst way to boil water ever imagined. And it's not going to get any better with small modular reactors. It's not going to get any better with next gen. Bill Gates is not going to save us. None of these guys. I mean, they're playing around with technology that we've experimented with for the past 50 years. And this nuclear renaissance has simply not happened.
You use the boiling water, the most expensive way to boil water in your book. Why don't you explain that? It's yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so uh, the so-called peaceful atom, atoms for peace, was to take is to take the. I mean, the world's strongest force is the atom, and if you manage to split it, you generate huge amounts of heat and power and blast, and you can either use it to kill hundreds of thousands of people, or you can use it to produce heat and boil water and run generators. And but you have to control that splitting of the atom, because if it runs away from you, you get Fukushima. You get not one, two, but three reactors that are in the process of melting down. But anyway, so you split the atom and you boil water and you run your generators. And then you, of course, you're producing nuclear fission products and nuclear waste. In fact, the spent fuel from reactors is a hell of a lot more dangerous. Sorry, am I allowed to say hell of a lot on
Oh,
radio?
we quoted the president saying, you
The F word. I don't think we quoted him though, Robert. But anyway, the fission products, the spent fuel from nuclear reactors is far more dangerous than the fuel that went into the reactors. But anyway, I return to the sheer cost. The sheer cost of generating power by boiling water in nuclear power plants is the world's most expensive power. It's why your friend Robert, why Stone in his film on nuclear power is just dead wrong, because it currently the levelized cost of energy for nuclear reactors, you're paying about $175 uh, per megawatt of power, and in fact per megawatt hour of power, I should say. And solar cells are now producing power at $40 per megawatt hour. So $40 versus $175. And that $175 of the levelized cost, I might add, is an underestimate, because they leave out of that the cost of cleaning up the spent nuclear fuel or storing it somewhere. They leave out the subsidies, the front end costs that go into nuclear power plants. This is just simply ridiculous. The United States will not be building 300 nuclear power plants in the next decade, as the president has promised. It will not be building small modular reactors. This nuclear renaissance is not going to happen.
Well, I wasn't intending to bring Oliver Stone, yes, and I actually worked did some writing along with my son Christopher for the Nixon movie that I think remains a very brilliant. I am a big admirer of his work. However, I did mention that I went to Chernobyl, and I am very concerned about this so-called peaceful use. But and you indicated considerable respect, I think, for Oliver's other filmmaking. So is that not true?
Yes,
Uh,
that is indeed true. He's done some exceedingly good work in his day, but his pro nuke film, I believe, is the worst film he's ever made.
Okay, well, I mean, you're allowed to disagree. However, I want to ask about that because he's not alone in that thought. And I mentioned at the beginning the nuclear scientist who gave us the bomb, and I think Hans Bethe was certainly one of the most brilliant of them. He was actually in charge of the theoretical work at Los Alamos and all that. And somebody I got to know a bit, and they spoke at UC Irvine at one point, and I spent time with him, and I was writing about nuclear weapons there. And he was very sensible about nuclear weapons, very concerned about Reagan's Star Wars and so forth. But like the other people that you mentioned in your book around Oppenheimer and so forth, they kept talking about this great new technology that would be unleashed. Were they're just kidding themselves? Was this just a kind of a defense of having created this incredible planet destroying or life destroying weapon that they actually held out the hope for this source of energy that would be free and would raise the prosperity of the world? I have an objection to that argument anyway. I think
Right,
even when
right.
it's
Well, you know
free,
that famous expression, "too cheap to meter." Anyway, nuclear power was never too cheap to meter. It was, in fact, incredibly expensive. The building of the bomb was a multi-billion-dollar project that required a labor force and an investment larger than the entire auto industry in the United States. And the first three nuclear reactors built in the United States were all devoted to making the plutonium and uranium for bombs. So much for that argument that the nuclear power plants are completely unrelated to bomb making, when in fact the first 13 nuclear reactors in the United States were entirely devoted to making bombs. But anyway, you mentioned Oppenheimer and the development of the bomb. Oppenheimer believed that this technology was far too dangerous to be put in the hands of civilians, and he actually opposed the development of civilian nuclear power. He thought it should be managed by the government. That, well, as we've seen in the case of India and Pakistan, when you transfer this technology, it's very easy to have a breakaway from a civilian power plant to bomb making, and or in the case of Israel. Uh, and so I think I don't know. There was a fair amount of guilt on the part of the physicists who built the bomb, and many of them were searching for other applications or other uses for this technology beside killing large numbers of people. But I don't know. For a brief, I believe for a brief while we developed nuclear power plants, but I think this technology, when you look at the amount of power that it's producing around the world, it is decreasing. It's going down in spite of, and if you remove China from the equation, it's definitely going down. I mean, half of all the nuclear power plants in France were closed last year because they didn't have enough water to cool them. Um, and global warming is going to have a profound effect on nuclear power plants. They require huge, vast sources of water to cool them, and if you run out of water, you can't run them. So France, which relies heavily on nuclear power, had most of its reactors, or half of its reactors, closed last year, and so I think I just think as a technology, I think this is a blunderbuss of a technology, and I think it's an ancient extractive technology, in spite of the pretense that it's the wave of the future.
Okay, but let me just say, by the way, to let Oppenheimer off the hook as you did, I don't think is accurate. I mean, I think he also had that same guilt. And to say government would manage it, Chernobyl was managed by a government, right? The bomb in, well, in Israel, in Pakistan, and India, those are all government managed bomb programs, and they certainly cross over into peaceful stuff that government manages. And in fact, one could almost argue it's interesting in your book. Your book is very interesting. It's how easy it is to lie about all this. As a journalist, I find this really compelling. And whether they're private companies or government companies, it's actually easier for government to lie because they claim national security and they don't have to tell you anything. But you offer lots of examples, including, and we should talk a little bit about Fukushima, which is your return. You had gone earlier, then you went back, and you say, yes, there are life is returning. Yes, yes. So before we close this, I'd like you to really talk about your book a little bit more because I think it's really important. But I don't think Oppenheimer gets. I mean, I sort of resent the idea that this major information now about Oppenheimer that defines him is a movie that doesn't mention this deal with the civilian casualties, with the mass deaths, but also guilt only takes you so far. And these guys didn't use their guilt to stop working on the weapon, but they used their guilt to say, "Oh no, but it'll have great peaceful application." And in fact, it didn't. So I'd like you to just straighten that out a little bit. But also, I didn't bring up fusion, which is another thing that China seems to be working on now, and another kind of breakthrough idea. Is that going to? Why are they fascinated? They claim real breakthroughs and so forth.
Well, Robert, once again, you've raised many subjects here. Uh, Fusion. In this book of mine, I talk about fusion, and I spent some time discussing it. I think that's another one of the over the rainbow projects that is not going to appear anytime soon. The joke about fusion is that it's always 30 years into the future, and it's been 30 years into the future for the past 60 years.
Oh,
So, uh, vast sums of money are being spent on this, but again, it produces more nuclear waste than fission power plants. It's a hugely dangerous technology. It requires vast amounts of tritium. You have to have a regular nuclear power plant next to a fusion power plant. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist is where you want to go to read articles uh, popping the fusion bubble. But yeah, that's something. Once again, I remain a profound skeptic in that regard.
okay. And so, what are we leaving out here from your book? Just on a personal note, you got into this because your father was working in government on, similar projects, and you have a sort of sense of concern and purpose here that I don't think we've captured. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but tell me what's the editorial here? What's the message? What do we need to know?
Yeah. So my father was a member of the military industrial complex. As a young man in World War II, he was on the beryllium desk at the War Production Board, and then he went to work in private industry for Brush Beryllium Company. And beryllium is used to make the triggers for the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also the bombs that were exploded, Bikini Atoll and Iwataq, and so on. Um, so, this has been something that has been in my family for a long time. And anyway, as you mentioned, I made a couple of trips to Fukushima. I spent time there to write a book because I believe it's the world's worst industrial accident. I believe when the final tally is made, as it approaches $1 trillion. This is one quarter of the entire gross domestic product of Japan. It's a huge sum of money, and it's just an enormous project. It's an enormous disaster, and as I say, it's ongoing. We've spent some time talking about nuclear weapons flying over the Middle East, or nuclear weapons flying between India and Pakistan, or nuclear weapons between Russia and Ukraine. This is all, at the moment, we're worried about it and speculating about it. But right under our noses at this moment, we have the disaster at Fukushima, which is, as I say, dumping large amounts of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. So much radioactive water that China has banned the import of fish from Fukushima. And no one is actually studying the result of this. The International Atomic Energy Agency has merely waved its hand over the issue. No one is financing any serious research. No one is financing research over the effect of the explosions and melting reactors on the Japanese population. This is a disaster for the Japanese. It's a great sadness. There's a Japanese writer who said that Japan exploded a third atomic bomb, and it dropped the bomb on itself. And the author was referring to what happened at Fukushima. I mean, these were first world GE reactors that were not supposed to blow up and melt down. And it has merely proved that this technology, which is supposedly safe, is in fact incredibly risky, and exposes itself to this kind of disaster roughly once every decade once you run the numbers. And we're overdue for the next one.
I think this is really an important point to take away from this discussion. And again, I'm going to bring myself in, having gone to Chernobyl. And again, that was a government managed program, it's not private sector. And you could argue it wasn't the profit motive, and I don't go along with the idea that these people were incompetent or drunk, or it was a peculiarly Russian problem. They had no one doubted their physics uh, physicians. They had very strong medical too, but then physics they were very strong, and they were strong in the engineering connected with it. And when I went into Chernobyl, I went with American scientists who were very, very knowledgeable, some leading people. I was the only journalist allowed to go, and no one faulted the design or the technology involved or the leadership or so forth, which made it a lot scarier, because if there had been some simple explanation, there were mistakes made, but mistakes do get made by human beings. And even by AI. What was truly alarming, and why your book had an impact on me, reminding me of all this, was I was with these very smart people who were, I think, more frightened than I was. Here I was on the phone occasionally to my wife saying, "What are you doing there? And why did you go?" And and so forth. And so I would turn to my companions there, and say, "Yeah, well, how risky is this?" As we were putting on the clothes and going in and so forth, and they say, "Damn risky," and we really don't know. And the don't know is, I think, what your book is about. Your book has a lot of we do know, and we do know, and we don't know, but the fact of the matter is, we haven't had the big one with peaceful use. We could go through the things that have gone wrong, but the danger is only. I disagree with you. You're much more expert than I am, but it seems to me there is a worldwide opening to using safe nuclear power. They're supposed to be smaller, they're supposed to be safer, and they're being marketed. And certainly, I want to end this by actually talking about the Chinese example. I start every morning reading the South China Morning Post from Hong Kong, owned by Alibaba. And there's constant stories in there, and they're a good paper. Constant stories about the advance of this technology and the marketing of it and so forth. And I want to end the way we began. Here is a country right next to Japan that had to be as frightened as anyone about what was going on there, to the point that they, altered their trading relations and caused a lot of anti-Chinese feeling in Japan. This was not a small thing, and as you say, the numbers are alarming, and it's not going away. That's a really important message for your book. It's not like you put it in a warehouse somewhere. One of the powerful things in your book is, you still have this stuff, and what do you do with it, and how do you control it, and so forth. So it's always a nightmare waiting to happen. But I would like you maybe to end this by why is maybe you're wrong. If you're right and it's just going to be phased out, we don't have to read your book. We don't have to have this discussion. And I'm not trying to promote your book, but it got my attention because I have a feeling, uh, basically it goes to a larger problem. Why do we want free and cheap energy? Because we want to keep making stuff. We want to keep making stuff maybe that we don't need. We want, there's not any idea of husbanding the planet, nurturing it. No, we want. So here's the allure of peaceful nuclear power is you can have it all without any consequence, right? Now, your book demolishes that. You nail the cost, you do the accounting, you show that it's not a free lunch, it's not a free ride. But nonetheless, that's the illusion. That's certainly the case with fusion now. And so to satisfy this idea of ever expanding appetite of consumption, I think this is appealing technology. You also, and the real value of just talking to you, even though you try to get me away from foreign policy, is that even countries that don't need this as an energy substitute, like Saudi Arabia and Iran, can easily, in the name of making peaceful products, actually be preparing for a weapon and so forth. And that's certainly the U.S. complaint about Iran. So maybe that would be a good way you can sort of wrap this up and we can keep it to 40 minutes so I don't uh, destroy your whole schedule. I just want to push back. I think it is an alluring proposition. And I think so. Maybe you could just talk about what is the temptation and who's biting for it. Certainly, China is. You haven't really addressed that. If they've experienced the adverse consequence of Fukushima, and yet why are they going down that same path?
Well, Robert, I think you very eloquently summarized the allure of this technology: free, cheap, unlimited, safe, uh, attractive in so many ways. If it only were. And what you haven't mentioned is that China has had their own problems with their nuclear reactors. They've had their own shutdowns, leaks, near escapes. Uh, there are those who believe that the next Fukushima, the next Chernobyl, the next 3 Mile Island will be coming out of China, and the the amount of propaganda, the sheer credulity, and the sheer foolishness on the part of our fellow journalists is something that continues to amaze me, just by its absolute volume. Uh, our fellow journalists just buy into the propaganda in a way that really is quite naive. This technology is not free, cheap, unlimited, safe. It is instead absolutely dangerous, and as I maintain, once you look at the record, we're we're approaching our next civilian nuclear disaster. For all I know, we're approaching our next nuclear war. And there are those people who believe that one can actually fight limited nuclear wars. That it's a small exchange of battlefield nuclear weapons is going to be just fine, and it will only incur local damage. But anyway, if you want to look at the results of nuclear disasters and nuclear exclusion zones and uh, the sheer trauma and pain and misery that are incurred when these radionuclides are released into the atmosphere. You go to the Chernobyl exclusion zone, you go to the Fukushima exclusion zone, you take a look at the downwinders from the Nevada test sites. Um, or you look at the Bikini Islanders in Eniwetak. There are lots of people, the global hibakusha or hibakusha. Uh, these are the radiation exposed people in the world. I think that there's a large number of them, and there is an increase in the number of exclusion zones around the world. And I just, the allure of this technology is that there will be no limits to growth. There will be no consequences for our acquiring stuff, for our having more and more stuff. Uh, and if you get rid of the limits to growth, then we can just keep dancing on the edge of the volcano forever. And we can
Yeah, of
keep
course.
acquiring more stuff and building more stuff and having more stuff.
Yeah, of course, that's a fallacy. Even if you could get the free energy, because you're still going to have all this junk, you won't have an ocean. You'll be filled with junk that you were burying there. Okay, that's it. I want to mention the book again, Return to Fukushima. It's OR Books. It's Thomas Bass. And I have not talked about the great body of his work here. Maybe we could bring him back and we could talk about Vietnam's book, which I have some disagreement about. There's others. No, but it's really an important body of work. And but I do want people to check this out for themselves. And I want to thank Joshua Shear, our producer, who made a strenuous argument for the necessity of doing this. And again, that's why I love doing this show. It forces me to read books. I only end up talking about the ones that I think other people should read. This is certainly high on the list. And I want to thank Diego Ramos for writing the intro, Max Jones for doing the video. I want to thank the JKW Foundation in memory of Gene Stein, a fiercely independent writer, for giving us some funding for this, and Integrity Media, and Len Goodman in Chicago for also giving us support. And see you on the next episode of Sheer Intelligence, where again the intelligence comes from our guest. In this case, it was Thomas Bass. See you.